I once told a friend that I would never make a video about the Gloam-eyed Queen because she was such an enigmatic character. Little did I know that my fifth Elden Ring lore video would be all about the Gloam-eyed Queen. So what made me change my mind? It all started when I first discovered Bonny Village and couldn't help but notice its striking resemblance to the windmill or Dominula village. We will talk more about the windmill village soon, but what really intrigued me about Bonny village was finding the Oh Mother gesture and a snake skin resting a short distance away. There are at least three prominent characters in the game associated with snakes. Rykard, a demigod and offspring of Radagon and Renala. Then we have Messmer, who calls Marika his mother. And of course, the Gloam-eyed Queen herself. I doubt the snakeskin in Bonny Village belongs to Rykard, since his story ends in the base game. Messmer has snakes, but they are too small to shed such an enormous skin. That leaves us with suspect number 3, the Gloam-eyed Queen herself. Could the snake skin we find in Bonny Village be hers? Was she serpentine in nature? These questions led me to take a closer look at the snake skin in Bonny Village and the Temple of Eagle. A casual glance at the snakeskin in Bonny Village doesn't reveal anything special. However, when you take a planimetric or top view, things begin to take shape. Things get even more interesting when we rotate the image of the snakeskin, and one's mind is blown away when you flip the image. The rotated and flipped image of the snakeskin reminds me of a pattern I have seen across the lands between. Oh yes, it's the pattern behind Marika's statues, scattered throughout the base game. At first, I wasn't sure, so I did a side-by-side comparison between the snakeskin I found in Bonny Village and the pattern behind Marika's statue. And oh boy, I was blown away. We have the two circular patterns, the tail and even the heads of Marika and the snake resting in the same position. At this point, I knew I had to investigate the large snake skin in the Temple of Eagle. But before we head to the Temple of Eagle, I would appreciate it if you subscribed to my channel if you haven't already. And while you are at it, please like and share your comments. I would also like to point out that this video is part 1 of my lore about the Gloam-eyed Queen. I will be collaborating with another talented friend called Way of Colors to bring you part 2. Way of Colors has a Discord server where he shares some of the best Elden Ring lore I have ever come across. You will find a link to his Discord server in the description below. I encourage you to pay his server a visit. Once again, the snake skin in the Temple of Igle reminded me of Marika's statues, particularly the way she stretches out her arms, which is very reminiscent of how the snake skin in the Temple of Igle has been stretched out. But that's not all. The God Slayer seal, an item associated with the Gloam-eyed Queen and her Godskin duo, has an intriguing design. If we rotate it so the pointed end faces upward and do the same for the footage of Marika we see during the opening cinematic of the base game, that is where she has a dark circular object behind her, we notice some striking similarities. The God Slayer's seal is black, just like the object behind Marika. Additionally, the God Slayer seal has two lines of semicircles decorated with golden floral patterns. And the object behind Marika also has two semicircular lines decorated with golden patterns. Also notice the golden bracelets around Marika's wrists, which resembles snake shapes. Marika has similar bracelets in the DLC trailer, where she extracts golden threads from a sack-like cloth. Does all this point to Marika being the Gloam-eyed Queen? It would be a bit premature to conclude that Marika is or was the Gloam-eyed Queen based solely on a snake skin. So, let's look at some of the other attributes of the Gloam-eyed Queen. We know the Gloam-eyed Queen harnessed the power of Black Flame, which was part of the Elden Ring. She also cradled young Godskin apostles. Let's talk about the Godskin apostles for a bit. The item description for the swaddle cloth specifically mentions Godskin apostles. There are two types of Godskin enemies in the game. The slim or slender type, who are the apostles, and the plump type known as nobles. Together, the apostles and nobles form the Godskin duo. So, perhaps it's only the apostles or slim Godskin enemies that were cradled in the Gloam-eyed Queen's swaddle cloth. This is significant because the Godskin apostles are reminiscent of another character in the game with a serpentine nature. Let's compare Messmer to a Godskin apostle. Their slender body frames, serpentine nature, and use of some type of flame are quite similar. Could Messmer have been a Godskin noble? Does the statue of Marika we find in Messmer's dark chamber cradling a baby imply that Marika cradled Messmer, who was a Godskin apostle? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. The Godskin enemies are located in strategic locations across the game. We encounter a Godskin noble on the bridge between the inverted Carian Study Hall and the Divine Tower of Leonia. We also encounter another in the Temple of Igle within Volcano Manor. Then we battle the Godskin duo in Farum Azula. For Godskin nobles, we encounter one in the Divine Tower of Caelid, where we obtain the God Slayer's great sword. Another is found in Dominula or the Windmill Village, which brings us to the striking similarities between Dominula and Bonny Village. Dominula is home to a matriarchal culture I will refer to as the celebrants, giving the names of the items they drop. These women appear to comprise two factions. One group wears a white cape adorned with the Earth Tree emblem, while another group wears a blue cape, aspects of which is reminiscent of the Gloam-eyed Queen's emblem or sigil. Interestingly, those adorned in blue cape drop a sickle, which reminds me of the weapons wielded by the Godskin apostles. Do you remember I mentioned at the beginning of this video that there is a striking resemblance between the architecture of the buildings in Dominula and Bonny Village? Perhaps now is a good time to expand on that subject. First, there is a well in Dominula, and we first make contact with Bonny Village via a well. Furthermore, there appears to be stables, perhaps for keeping horses, in both Bonny Village and Dominula. It is interesting to note that Bonny also translates to beautiful or attractive, which might reference the nature of the women who inhabited it. But the Windmill Village or Dominula is not the only location in the game where we find celebrants. There is another group located in the Hermit Village in Mount Gilman. However, these celebrants are dead, and what is even more intriguing is the pattern on their capes. Their capes are adorned with the Gloam-eyed Queen sigil or emblem. There is an unrelated observation I made in the Hermit Village that I couldn't help but point out in this video. If you rest at the site of grace close to Master Azure and make your way out of the village, you would come across a rune bear which jumps onto the ground from a small cliff on the right. I always wondered what could account for the bear's actions. But after investigating the location where it jumps from, I realized it was protecting something precious: a bear cub. I believe the rune bear's actions are meant to divert attention from its cub, an action innate to motherhood. And it's interesting to note that the Gloam-eyed Queen embodies motherhood. After all, she loves to cradle babies. This brings us to the virgin abductors spread across the lands between. All the virgin abductors we encounter in the game have heads, except the one in the Hermit Village. Well, in the Land of Shadow, there are at least two types of decapitated statues or entities: Marikas and the one close to Bonny Village, where we find the O Mother gesture. But we shall get into the significance of decapitation later. Alright, so we know there is some connection between the Godskin apostles and the women of Dominula. It also appears there are three types of celebrants. We have the two variants in Dominula who adorn blue and golden capes depicting the Gloam-eyed Queen and the Earth Tree emblems respectively. Then there is the third variant located in the Hermit village who wear capes bearing a pattern reminiscent of the Gloam-eyed Queen's emblem, albeit in a golden color. Put a pin in all this information as we shall return to it later. Now, let's delve into Black Flame, a power harnessed by the Gloam-eyed Queen from the Elden Ring, which she used to cause the demise of gods. If the Gloam-eyed Queen used the power of the Elden Ring to amplify the power of her Black Flame, one could argue that the Rune of Death is what amplified the power of the Gloam-eyed Queen's Black Flame. Malekith, Marika's shadow beast, defeated the Gloam-eyed Queen and sealed away the Rune of Death, from which Ranni eventually stole a portion to create the blade used to cause Godwyn's demise. But during our battle with Malekith in Farum Azula, he eventually lets loose the power of destined death, and by extension, the Black Flame, which he imbues into his sword. This gives his sword the properties of the god-slaying blade, which can reduce and wear down HP. So, it's almost as if Malekith possesses another god-slaying sword. But there is more. A closer examination of Malekith's blade reveals an intriguing pattern. Notice that the blade has one side of its guard broken. Let's compare the Black Blade to an endgame scene. The scene I'm referring to is where our player character stands before Marika's decapitated statue. Do you notice how Marika has only one hand shaped in the form of a sword guard? Also notice how the lower part of Marika is adorned with a black cloth. Then we have Marika's fractured nature. It's almost as if Marika is meant to depict Malekith's black blade. There is another scene in the game where a beast wields a human as a blade. During our battle with the Elden Beast, it wields a sword reminiscent of the god-slaying blade. But have you ever paused to ponder how the Elden Beast secures its sword? The sword appears when we defeat Radagon, and the Elden Beast drags his remains into the ground, only to rise to the surface, wielding the sword. I posit that the sword derives from the remains of Radagon. Thus, the Elden Beast wields Radagon, or more specifically, his corpse as its sword. Okay, it's time to put everything together. The Gloam-eyed Queen has a strong association with snakes, which manifests through the Godskin apostles and nobles. The Godskin nobles appear to bear a striking resemblance to Messmer, who from all indications could be Marika's child. The Gloam-eyed Queen also harnessed the power of destined death to amplify the power of her black flame, which she used to cause the death of gods. After defeating the Gloam-eyed Queen, Marika sealed the power of destined death away. However, during our battle with Marika, he extracts the power of destined death from the amulet in his hand and puts it into his black blade. This blade is reminiscent of Marika's depiction during the base game's endings, where we replace Marika's head on her decapitated, fractured body. We also discussed the headless virgin abductor in the hermit village, where we see dead celebrants whose capes bear the sigil or emblem of the Gloam-eyed Queen, albeit in a golden color. So, what do all these observations mean? I have two theories. The first theory is that the observations I have pointed out so far imply that Marika was once the Gloam-eyed Queen. The second theory is that the Gloam-eyed Queen was once a separate entity, perhaps an Empyrean like Marika, but Marika, through Malekith, defeated her and absorbed her abilities. Now, let's delve a bit more into each theory. Marika is often referred to as the Eternal, meaning she lives forever or never dies. It is intriguing that another demigod makes a similar proclamation after he's defeated in battle by our tarnished character. Rykard, a demigod who offered himself to a primordial serpent in his quest for power, mocks us after his defeat by telling us that
I servant never die.
The second sentence implies that Rykard believes a serpent is eternal. After his defeat, the only part of his body that remains is his head. So, it is as if he's telling our player character that as long as his head remains, he will never die. After defeating the Elden Beast, we are presented with multiple options to bring about specific ages. Interestingly, all the ages associated with mending the Elden Ring require our player character to reinstate Marika's head onto her decapitated body. Could it be that Marika is also eternal as long as we reinstate her head? After all, she embodies the Elden Ring, and as long as the Elden Ring exists, she will continue to exist, thus making her eternal. Also think about how snakes are killed in most cultures. Most people would agree that the best approach is to smash the snake's head or decapitate it. Therefore, Rykard is not entirely wrong when he tells us that a serpent never dies, because his head survives the battle with our player character. I am sure the Hunsent in the Land of Shadow were well aware of the significance of Marika's serpentine nature, which led them to decapitate her statues. Perhaps they did that to make Marika aware that just as a snake is decapitated to ensure its complete demise, Marika, a serpent, would be decapitated to prevent her from living for eternity. Another piece of evidence that points to Marika potentially being the Gloam-eyed Queen is how Malekith's black blade is shaped like the decapitated, fractured body we interact with in the air tree. If Marika represents the black blade, then Malekith putting destined death into the black blade and imbuing it with black flame properties could symbolize Malekith putting back the power of black flame into Marika, who was originally wielder of the black flame's power. The only wrinkle in the theory I have just posited is that the game tells us that Malekith defeated the Gloam-eyed Queen and sealed away destined death. So if Marika was the Gloam-eyed Queen, how could her own shadow beast defeat her, seal away her source of power, and still work with her to retrieve destined death when it was stolen by Rani? Well, I thought about this question and I believe I have a compelling answer. Shadow beasts are meant to keep their Empyreans in check. As a result, they prevent the Empyreans from acting contrary to the dictates of the Fingers. However, Blythe, another shadow beast given to Rani by the Fingers, appears to have gone against the dictates of the Fingers. Yet, Blythe continues to help Rani in her quest to find the Fingerslayer blade, which would rid her of the influence of the Fingers. It is therefore plausible that during her era as the Gloam-eyed Queen, Marika had Malekith as her shadow beast. Like Rani and Blythe, she may have managed to convince Malekith to defeat her, which does not necessarily mean kill her, and seal away the power of the black flame so she could go on to become a god of a different era, an era of the Earth Tree, devoid of destined death. Perhaps she had witnessed the consequences of causing destined death and repented of what she saw as an atrocity. Could it be that after Marika, who was formerly the Gloam-eyed Queen, made Malekith to defeat her, she took on the form we now know as Marika and ascended to godhood to be reborn as a new god to bring about a new age, an age of eternal life, where those who placed their faith in her air tree would live forever? This is a question that requires deeper reflection. So, please share your thoughts in the comments below. There is also the question of why we find the Godskin prayer book and Godslayer seal in Stormveil Castle. Both items relate to the Gloam-eyed Queen, so it is perplexing to find them in Stormveil Castle of all places. But wait, we also acquired the Mimic's Veil from Stormveil Castle. The item description of the Mimic's Veil states that it is part of a multitude of treasures Godric took with him when he was hounded from Lindell, the royal capital. In fact, the Mimic's Veil is also called Marika's mischief, implying that Marika could be the owner of the veil. If the mimic veil is one of the items Godric brought from the royal capital, then could it be that Godric also brought with him the Godskin prayer book and Godslayer seal when he was hounded from the royal capital? If that is the case, then it is also possible that the Godslayer seal and the prayer book belonged to Marika, just as the mimic's veil belonged to her. This would mean that Marika was once Gloam-eyed Queen and only hid the evidence of her past life and nature in the capital after she became the god of the Erd tree. Now, let's consider the second possibility, which is that the Gloam-eyed Queen was a different entity whom Malekith defeated, allowing Marika to absorb her abilities or powers. This theory hinges on the fact that the celebrants we find in Dominula represent a past culture where Marika's people, the tree worshippers, coexisted with the Gloam-eyed Queen's people, the snake worshippers. After all, the relationship between trees and snakes is common among many cultures and faiths. I posit that shamans was a name ascribed to both Marika's tree worshipping culture and the Gloam-eyed Queen's snake worshipping culture. However, the tree worshipping folks were located in the shaman village, while the snake worshipping folks were located in Bonny village. But Marika, in her quest for power, needed to eliminate any competition, especially the Gloam-eyed Queen, who was another Imperium. This would lead her to disclose the location of Bonny village to the Hunsent, who would sacrifice the snake-worshipping shamans at the Gate of Divinity to enable Marika ascend to godhood. But before Marika's ascension, she would have asked Malekith to defeat the Gloam-eyed Queen to eliminate any competition. It is possible the decapitated statue we find close to Bonny village is associated with the Gloam-eyed Queen. This could explain the snake skin we find a short distance away from the decapitated statue in Bonny village. I would even argue that the "Oh Mother" gesture we find on the decapitated statue could be Messmer's astonishment after learning what his mother had done. Do you remember the headless virgin abductors and the dead celebrants we find in the hermit village? I believe the game developers placed them there to give us a clue about what happened in Bonny village. There is a headless deity who could potentially relate to the Gloam-eyed Queen in Bonny village. Bonny village is reminiscent of Dominula, where we find women adorned in blue capes with a pattern reminiscent of the Gloam-eyed Queen seal. Then we see similar women in the hermit village where the headless virgin abductor is located. I believe all this evidence points to the fact that there was once a community of women associated with the Gloam-eyed Queen and by extension serpents in Bonny village. However, just like the headless abductor virgin in hermit village, their deity in Bonny village was decapitated. The golden color of the capes worn by the women in the hermit village would therefore represent the assimilation of the Gloam-eyed Queen's abilities into the Erd tree. Let's not forget Marika is a shaman and thus has the ability to mend well with other bodies. So it wouldn't be far-fetched to posit that Marika merged with the Gloam-eyed Queen after defeating her. I believe you are wondering which of the two theories I subscribe to. That is a story that I shall tell in part 2 of this video. So please be on the lookout for part 2, where I shall reveal which theory I subscribe to with some mind-blowing evidence and footage that will change the way you look at the game. Until then, please like, share this video, and don't forget to click the subscribe button if you have not yet subscribed to this channel. See you in the next video.